Good morning. Welcome to our live webcast, Power of Interracial Sisterhood. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Lanika Mussolini, and I will be providing features of the web event technology, managing the chat, and presenting the session facilitator this morning. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time, you may adjust your audio using any computer volume settings that you may have. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see the Q&A or chat window. There is a large window which holds all of your sent messages and a smaller text box at the top where you will type in your questions. To send a question, click in the text box and type in your text. When finished, click the Ask button. Your questions will be responded to at the end of the presentation as time permits. We are joined today by our session facilitator, Karen Fleshman, founder of Racy Conversations. Karen is a mentor, activist, entrepreneur, attorney, author, educator, and a proud San Francisco, as well as a single soccer mom. Karen is, her work really has been in immigrants' rights movement and preparing young adults of color for careers in tech. As mentioned earlier, Karen is the founder of Racy Conversations, a workshop facilitation company to inspire the anti-racist generation. Her first book, White Women Will Need to Talk, Doing Our Part to End Racism, will be published by Sounds True in 2021. At this time, I would like to turn the microphone over to session presenter, Karen Fleshman. Let's get started.
Thank you, Dr. Lanika, and thank you, Dr. Nika White, for inviting me, and for all of you for tuning in this morning. I really appreciate your participation. We're going to be talking about the power of interracial sisterhood, and I think it's a very, very important theme at this point in our country's history. Interracial sisterhood is needed now more than ever, and I'm really grateful that you've decided to participate today. And it will be very interactive, so I will be posing questions throughout, and I'd just like you to answer those questions in the chat function, and Dr. Lanika will then share those comments with me. I am Karen Fleshman. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the founder and CEO of Racy Conversations. My Twitter handle is @FleshmanKaren, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. And I urge you to connect with me on there so that we can keep this conversation going. And I'd love to get to know you as well. With that in mind, I'd like to offer a warm-up question, and you can just go ahead and drop this in the chat. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being very comfortable and 5 being very uncomfortable, how comfortable are you engaging in a conversation about the power of interracial sisterhood? And know that there's no right answer. If you are a 5, I am so glad you're here. If you are a 1, I'm glad you're here. There's no right answer. I just like to take a temperature of the room. And as these responses are coming in, I'd love to hear what people are putting in the chat. Are folks responding? Maybe there's a little bit of a delay.
Yeah, hold on just a minute.
Okay. Since there appears to be a little bit of a delay, I'm just going to keep rolling with the conversation, but please do let me know what you're seeing in the chat as we go along, Dr. Lanika. And I can't hear you, so maybe you're muted.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, great.
I have to stay muted for the background, but I will connect with you as soon as I get those results.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay, there are lots of 2s, 4s, and 3s.
Okay, great. I'm so glad you are all here, and let's dive right in. Racy Conversations' core values are love, learning, action, and accountability. And I'd like to offer those as our community agreements for this morning. I know that this is not the easiest thing to talk about, and I want to give a content warning that we are going to be talking about some very difficult subjects, including sexual violence and domestic violence. So please, let's come into this room in a spirit of love, that we're trying to make things better. Let's recognize this as a space of learning and respond with curiosity and to each other. Let's take action. Let's not just come in here and learn this stuff, but let's try and apply it out in the real world. And let's do so in accountability to each other, so that we can build the kind of world that we all want to be a part of. So with those 4 core values in mind, can everybody agree to applying these core values? And you can put that in the chat as well. And as you're responding to the core values, I'd like to share a little bit of my story and the race and gender stereotypes that I grew up learning. So on the left is the picture of me with my parents growing up in an almost entirely white community in Colorado. And from my parents, as far as gender, I got some really interesting messages. Like, you know, my parents had a very equal partnership in some ways. My mother became the breadwinner. My father became disabled. That put a lot of pressure on my mom. And she suffered age and gender-based employment discrimination. So I saw at an early age what discrimination does to a person's self-esteem, as well as how it impacted our entire family. But my father always encouraged me to be a nonconformist and to be my own self, to be an entrepreneur, and he had a lasting impact on me. As far as race, my parents taught me racism is terrible, Dr. Martin Luther King is wonderful, and the way to not be racist is to be colorblind and treat everybody the same. But because we lived in a nearly all-white community, I never actually saw them do that. They were just telling me to do that. Meanwhile, at school, I'm seeing all these very disturbing images of Black people that were designed to educate us not to take drugs, right? This whole Just Say No campaign where they would show us movies of people overdosing on heroin, and that was supposed to be a deterrent from us taking drugs. And at home, I saw a lot of sensationalized images of Black people on TV. So as I grew older, it started to question, well, why is there so much racial inequality? The story I got back is we used to have a terrible problem with racism in our country. Then there was a civil rights movement. Now everything is equal and some families work hard. That's why they have what they have, and other families choose not to. And that's why they're in the situation that they're in. And had I not spent my career working in very diverse organizations, majority people of color organizations, reporting to women of color, I think that might still be my understanding of racial inequality. But I've made my career first in the immigrants' rights movement, later in workforce development, where I became the mentor to hundreds of young adults as they began corporate careers. And here you see me with 2 young women from Oakland, who I'm their mentor, but as I say, my mentees are my greatest mentors. This was a conversation that we had back in 2014 after Darren Wilson wasn't indicted for killing Mike Brown. And I was expressing my surprise, my dismay. They said to me, "Why are you surprised? No one's ever indicted for killing us." And then we started talking about what it was like for them working at these tech companies. And they said, listen, we are so grateful for our incomes, our lifestyles, but coming into work every day, we are bombarded with toxicity, a lot of it coming from women who look like you. And that was that moment when I realized that I needed to stop preparing young adults of color for the workplace and start preparing the workplace for young adults of color. That was the genesis of Racy Conversations. So as I'm sharing my story, I'd love to hear in the chat about race and gender stereotypes that you learned growing up, and how you think those stereotypes might be showing up, that belief system might be showing up in the way you relate with other women today. And as those stories roll in, I will come back. So Lanika, will you let me know when you hear some of those stories and beliefs?
I sure will.
Thank you. What we're going to be talking today about is women's challenges. Who divided women and why? And what steps can we take for today toward interracial sisterhood? And as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about violence. So if you need to take a break from this material, if you need to just calm yourself and soothe yourself as we go into this material, I urge you to pay attention to how this is landing in your body and take care of yourself throughout this conversation. And I have another question for you, which is, when I say interracial sisterhood, what images pop up in your mind? And are you seeing any beliefs roll in?
I'm not seeing anything right now.
Okay, okay. We'll just keep rolling. One image that I was deeply touched by recently, this was just a few weeks ago. This was a US Women's Soccer League game between two teams. And this was just as stories were breaking about sexual assault by the US Women's Soccer team professionals against players. And they began the game by coming out on the field and forming this circle. And it was so powerful just to see women holding each other and being so united together that everyone, I was crying, everyone, the announcers were crying, the people in the audience were crying. This is very, very deeply touching image. And we don't have a lot of them, but I'm grateful for every time we see images of the power of women uniting across difference. So as you see those images, I urge you to screenshot them and keep them so that you have something to look at. The power of the image is very, very powerful in helping us to create the kind of world that we want to see. I'm going to keep rolling unless you have something
Karen,
to share from the
yes,
chat. Yes,
we actually do. We have some comments, and Mika writes for interracial sisterhood, the image of a variety of women that look differently pops into my mind. I picture them huddled close like you would be in a group photo and smiling. Amyrna shared interracial sisterhood, women of all races, ethnicities, cultures, etc., helping one another overcoming obstacles that might impact all women or only women of a particular group. And Rachel shared all women lifting each other up in support and encouragement.
Yay, yay. And I feel all of that in this image right here. I'm so grateful. Thank you all for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about women's challenges right now. So we really got the memo, right? That a college education is the key to professional success. And many, many women are going into higher education. We're earning, for the last 10 years, we have earned the majority of bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctorate degrees. We are winning the education race. But something happens when we enter the workplace. We start out compensated equally, and I apologize that this is referencing the gender binary. I want to be inclusive of everyone. I believe the interracial sisterhood conversation has to be inclusive of gender nonconforming people, trans people, et cetera, et cetera. So I apologize that this data is reported on the gender binary. That is the way that it was collected. So we see at the beginning, at the early stages of our career, men and women's representation and compensation is roughly equal. But as people start to advance to the manager level, the percentage of women represented drops 11%. And then it drops even more as you advance to the highest stages of the hierarchy at the corporate CEO level or C-suite level. The percentage drops by 50%, while the representation of men increases by 25%. And people have probably experienced this over the course of their careers. Meanwhile, the gender gap widens. Women are 52% of the US population, but we make up 20% of C-level leadership, 1 out of every 5. And women of color are only 3%, 1 out of every 33 C-level leaders. Only 33 women are Fortune 500 CEOs, and only 2 of them are women of color. And this data was reported by Lean in 2020. 81% of white people claim to be allies to women of color in the workplace, but only 45% of Black women report having allies at work, and only 10% of Black women report that their main allies are white. So women are getting all these degrees, going into the workplace, but something is happening in the workplace that is not resulting in parity over the course of time. And part of it is women not supporting other women. Now, it's also true that in addition to women who have highly compensated professional careers, women make up the majority of low-wage workers. And there is a huge earnings gap. Just this month, we're going to have Latina Women's Equal Pay Day. I think it's this week. That is how far into 2021 Latina women have to work in order to be compensated at the same level that white men were compensated in 2020. So here we see how it breaks out across white men, Asian American women, white women, Black women, Latinx women, and we know that Native American women are in between Black women and Latinx women in terms of our annual earnings. In addition to the workplace discrimination, violence against women is pervasive in our society. 1 in 4 women in the United States experience severe intimate partner violence. 1 in 5 women in the USA experience completed or attempted rape. And we know that these numbers are underreported, and also that this domestic violence and sexual violence has increased during the pandemic as people have been confined to their homes. In 2018, global experts were surveyed on which countries are most dangerous to women, and they listed the United States is the only Western democracy ranked in the top 10 most dangerous countries for women. So here we often like to wag our fingers and point at other countries and say, you're being terrible to women, when we aren't taking care of our own country and ending the pandemic of gender and domestic violence that long predates COVID. Violence cuts across all income and racial groups, but when it comes to Black and Indigenous women and girls, they're particularly impacted, and receive much less media attention and overall support. And as I'm saying that, can anyone point to any recent examples of that, what I'm talking about here? Examples of how Black and Indigenous women and girls receive much less media attention and overall support than white women.
Karen, first I want to let you know that there is some background noise. I'm not sure where that's coming from, although beautiful, we can hear that. But in our chat, people are talking about the Gabby Petito case and how it's gotten this national news coverage when we know for a fact that Indigenous women and other women of color have gone missing and have been murdered and not received any news attention at all.
Exactly. And it also shows up in who gets prosecuted, right? So 2017, New York Times does a story about Harvey Weinstein, and 3 years later, he is in prison for 22 years, right? 25 years ago, people started complaining of R. Kelly's sexual violence, and it took 25 years before he was held to account and imprisoned for that. So there's a huge differential in how these victims of domestic violence or of sexual assault are cared for in our society, whose stories are believed, whose stories matter. And this is one of the main reasons why interracial sisterhood is so tremendously important, so that we can start to close that gap and make the society safer and freer for all women, not just elite women, not just white women, but for everyone. Let's talk a little bit about where these myths originated. Why do white women receive so much more media attention and support? By talking about who divided women and why. And I'm going to share a series of images here. They are disturbing, so just brace yourself. So this image is of how white men in England were treating white women in England before they came to the United States. This was a form of torture where especially older women who were outspoken or tried to point out anything to challenge the order, they would be led through the town, and often they were led naked through the town and then put into this chair and essentially waterboarded as a way to silence them, as a form of torture and as role modeling to everyone that this is the treatment that women who spoke out or tried to change anything, how they would be received. This was, can anyone recall reading books or other aspects about early American history where similar things were happening in the United States to white women? I'm speaking here of the Scarlet Letter. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. One person commented witch hunt.
Yes, exactly. The Salem witch hunts. And I remember reading the Scarlet Letter when I was a kid, right? And I was like, what is going on in this story? This is terrible, terrible, right? So this was how oppressive of women the culture was before it even came over to this country, right? Now, when they did bring white women over here, because the Jamestown settlers knew that in order to make the plantation an intergenerational enterprise, they needed to have white women to produce white heirs so that they would have someone to pass it on to. They knew that they could continue raping the Native American women and the Black women, but if they did that, they would soon lose track of who was in charge. So they brought these women over from England. They paid for their passage in tobacco. They were called tobacco brides. And then they would marry them so that they could start creating the intergenerational enterprise. And you can see these women are dressed in these fancy outfits, but they're only allowed to do this as long as they are following in line with these men. And as you're looking at this image, does it resonate with you any contemporary images that are very similar to this one? Where else do we see this type of behavior today? And what I see when I look at this picture is, you will be punished if you speak out. You will be waterboarded, burned at the stake. But as long as you align yourself with us and follow our leadership in this line, you will be rewarded with fancy dresses and nice purses and, have this um, life of luxury.
Yeah, I'm seeing mail order brides in the chat.
Yes, yes. A definite continuation of this to today. Now, in order for these white women to sign onto this contract, that meant they had to do terrible things to Black women, to Native American women. And this was the beginning of the divide between women. So the founding fathers created a gendered racist belief system and taught it to all of us that this is the natural order of things, that they are the ones who are the natural leaders, should be in charge, have the right to bear arms to protect property and white women, and trans men and queer men aren't real men. They're not even part of this equation. White cishet women are good, right, moral, honest, just, beautiful, the only good mothers, well-mannered, and weak and defenseless. And we need protection by white men from the subhuman Black and Indigenous men who are out to attack us. Trans women and queer women, older women, etc., they're not real white women. They have no value. Black and Indigenous men are less than human, bad, wrong, immoral, dishonest, ugly, lazy, without manners, unjust, likely to attack the defenseless white woman, and therefore deserving of harm. Latinx men are dumb and lazy, and Asian American men are smart and weak. Trans men and queer men of color aren't real men, aren't even part of this equation. And Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian American women are prostitutes, promiscuous, ugly, lazy, wanton, strong, unfeeling, subhuman, bad mothers, and therefore deserving of rape. Trans women and queer women of color aren't real women. And as I'm describing this gendered racist belief system, think about how this still is active in our culture today, right? Where do we see these beliefs being spread today? Now, throughout, Black women were saying to white women, what the heck are you doing? Like, hello, wake up. We are all women. We are all strong. We don't need, like, why are we aligning ourselves with the system? White women, unite with us, Black women, and then we can take this down together. We are sisters. This is Sojourner Truth speaking at the 1848 suffragettes conference. So abolition, the movement to end slavery in the United States, is the root of the women's rights movement in the United States. But instead of listening to Black women and saying, oh yes, we truly are equals, the white women suffragettes who were struggling for women to attain the right to vote treated Black women like second-class citizens and did not form a united front. And that is why 70 years later, when they got the right to vote, it was only for white women. They said, give us the right to vote, you'll double the white vote, we'll preserve white supremacy, and you can keep all the Jim Crow laws in place, and Black women will not be able to vote. That is how ultimately the right to vote was won. And as I'm saying this, uh, uh, what I'm trying to point out is that definitely white men, powerful white men divided us, but white women subscribed to those beliefs and said, you know what? This is going to advantage me. This isn't going to advantage my family if I continue to believe in white supremacy and uphold white supremacy and not be united across difference, even though Black women were saying, hey, let's do this together. And is this resonating with people? Does this history make sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah.
There's just a little bit of lag in the chat, but when we think about recent history and how there was a strike going on yesterday because, well, not a strike, but the people were out parading in DC because of the filibuster and all of the states changing their voting rights to really suppress the vote of people of color. And so, just trying to find a solution so that we're not suppressing the votes, but ensuring that everyone has the rights and liberties that were granted to them in the Constitution. And the states are now, after the 2020 election, they're now changing it to where it's really going to benefit a certain party. Yes. And so, we're seeing this play out in real life. And you think about the pendulum shift, and my parents always says things always come back around, but maybe in a different way. And we're seeing this now in modern day after everything that transpired with the 2020 election.
100%. And you think about when Black women got the right to vote, 1965, right? Through the civil rights movement, getting the Voting Rights Act passed. And then we get a Black president elected, and the Supreme Court says, oh, we don't need voting rights protections anymore. Look, everything's fair now. And immediately the states start passing laws to restrict the right to vote, which only accelerates. And now there's like 49 states have bills to restrict the right to vote. So this is not happening in just certain parts of the country. It is happening everywhere, and it is of grave, grave concern. And I encourage everyone to take action around this. This is really the fundamental, our democracy is at stake. So Audre Lorde, Black feminist, revolutionary, poet, mother, in 1980, she gave a talk about why women did not achieve the Equal Rights Amendment. So there had been a movement to try and pass an amendment to the Constitution that would have recognized women's full equality. And it was actually white women who campaigned against it. And ultimately, the amendment did not pass, although just recently, Virginia adopted it. So now enough states have adopted it that it could pass, but I'll leave that for another day. But she talked about in that talk, we have no patterns of relating across our human differences as equals because we have all grown up in this hierarchical system and seen all these patterns of behavior that follow that gendered racist belief system I shared before. When women do try and get in a room together and try and make social change together, we wind up hurting each other because we don't know how to relate across differences equals. We only know that to be a man is good, to be a woman is bad, to be white is good, to be Black is bad, to be straight is good, to be queer is bad. And so she said, what we're gonna have to do is figure out how we can relate across difference as equals. because all of the things that we do to preserve that hierarchy causes us to split apart. And she says that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. If women want to be free, we are going to have to not do the things that we were taught over 400 years of our history and change the way that we relate with one another. And let me take a beat there and ask if there's anything coming up in the chat now.
I'm not seeing anything currently.
Okay, great. So what happens? How can we start moving towards interracial understanding? And how many of us have ever been in a fraught interracial interaction? I know I have. And I believe that we are carrying all of that history, all of the history of the harm that my ancestors inflicted on your ancestors is inside of both you and inside of me. And so when we get in the room together, it's not just us that are in there, it's all that past trauma that we need to work on healing. And how it shows up in the room is I really liked this study from the Journal of Personal and Social Psychology, that white people come into the room wanting to be liked, feeling self-conscious because we often don't have very much experience relating across difference, not self-aware of our racial advantages, not aware of that history that I just talked about, but desperately seeking affirmation that we're not racist. That's very important to us. All of that goes into our brain and we act on stereotypes and act too casual. Oh, I know, I bet they probably like this music artist, or maybe they think this movie is cool. So I'm gonna say I like that too, and then they'll like me and affirm that I'm not racist. But people of color coming into the interaction want to be respected. They want to be seen as an individual and not as a representative of their entire group. They certainly have zero desire to affirm to white people that we're not racist. And when white people act too casual, they take that, and that is why we have a hard time even having an initial interaction with each other. And as I'm sharing this, is this making sense to people? Has anyone ever had an interaction that was like this?
Give it a few seconds and see if anyone responds.
Sure. And as we're doing that, let's talk about what we can do to heal our divides. And I'm going to speak here about white women's work because
Karen,
we are.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Before you move forward with
Mhm.
that next topic, could you talk real quickly about the importance of self-awareness when having or approaching racy or critical conversations?
Thank you so much. That is exactly what I'm going to be talking about now.
Great.
Yes, that is a perfect segue to this next session. So it is extremely important for white women to develop that self-awareness, because unless and until we have that, we can cause tremendous harm. So we need to really work on ourselves before we are ready to interact in a way that's going to be helpful, not harmful. So facing our history and ourselves, really understanding how this legacy of violence is still inside of our bodies today, and working to heal from our intergenerational trauma as well. Like what were we doing back then that is still inside of us today? And thinking about the beliefs I spoke about at the beginning that we were raised with, and how those beliefs are driving our behavior today. These are things that we need to work on before we can start to really build that interracial sisterhood. Continuously working on identifying and eliminating our racism and internalized misogyny. How have we internalized that treatment of being waterboarded if we spoke out against injustice? How have we waterboarded other women who spoke out against injustice? These are all patterns of behavior that we need to work on, as well as what we're willing to give up, like that we give up our freedom in order to have the fancy houses and the fancy purses. We need to think about that too, and start to give up the fancy houses and the fancy purses in order to have our freedom. We can only earn trust by showing up consistently. We have caused so much harm. There's such a long legacy there that we're not going to heal this today. Like, we're going to have to do this work on ourselves and then start showing up for a long period of time consistently before we can earn trust. Amplify women of color, hire and support women of color in the workplace. We have to address that slide that said 81% of white people claim to be allies, but only 10% of Black women identify white people as allies. Recognize and intervene when we see harm occurring. Okay, so instead of coming up to the woman who was harmed after the fact and say, oh, I noticed that was really messed up. Intervene when you see harm. Take a risk and stand up for the woman who is being harmed. And oftentimes we are the ones who cause the harm. So if someone is kind enough to point it out to us, hey, what you are doing is really harmful, we need to receive that feedback with grace, not deny, not deflect, not defend, but no. Receive that feedback with grace and work on ourselves so that we don't do that behavior again, and apologize to the person who we harmed. And our most important work is really to convince more white women to join us, to gather our sisters, gather our cousins, and bring them into this fold. So let me take a pause there and see, did that address your question about self-awareness?
Yes,
Dr.
that is
Linika?
great. Absolutely. I think it's important to note that, self-awareness is a continuous work.
Yes.
We can't just do one or two exercises and think that we have it all together, because it's not true. And so, just understanding that the work of self-awareness has to occur daily, through reflection, through exercise, through, having conversations with other people to learn more about yourself. Because believe it or not, people who are around you daily know more about you than you think. And so it's important to listen to those people. And we have had some additional comments in the chat as well. One of our participants says that, she's been in situations where people automatically assume that African-American women can relate to specific topics of conversation, when that may not be. It's more stereotyping, I suppose, when people do that. And we have another one from Amyrna who says, in my experience, it's been difficult to convince other white women to be allies for women of color. Are there any suggestions?
Yes. Are there any suggestions? I think so how can women of color convince white women to become greater allies? I think.
I'm sorry. I think it's more of how can white women convince other white women to become allies?
Oh my gosh, yes. This stuff is not easy. But I think we all have networks of white women, and it's about not judging or how can I put it, not acting superior, but listening to them and what are they struggling with. I know many white women in my circle are really struggling with their financial situation. They're struggling with their overwhelm with the pandemic, et cetera, and really questioning, women have been put back a generation in terms of our labor market participation, We have a lot of challenges with our kids and helping our kids through all of this. So really listening to other women as they talk about this, and then saying, you know, this is the time for women to unite across difference and change these things, because we're never going to be able to fix this individually. This is something we have to fix collectively. And women of color have been leading this work. They have been leading the work towards women's liberation for since the beginning of this country. And if we as white women can follow their leadership and really support and uplift their leadership, they know what to do to make things better for all women. We need to listen to them, follow them, support them, shield them, because they're subjected to tremendous violence, that kind of waterboarding image for speaking out. And don't do that to them as fellow women, including in our voting decisions. And I think it's through having those kinds of impactful conversations with other women that we can start to get them to identify how they have been harmed by the patriarchy as well.
Yes, that's a terrific response.
Shall I go to the next slide, or anything else from the chat you'd like me to reflect on? And we will have questions and answers. So as we start to wind down the spoken presentation, please think about the questions that you would like to pose, so we can have, you can start putting those in the chat.
Yes.
How can we build trust across difference? Here are some pointers for how to get things off by putting your best self forward. First, learn how to pronounce their name correctly, the other woman's name correctly. This is very important. Don't say, that's so exotic, or that's too complicated, I can't learn that. It is a sign of respect to learn how to say someone's name correctly, and take the time to really do that. If you forget their name, that's okay. I mean, that sometimes happens. Ask them again, you know, but don't just blow that part off. Be humble, okay? Do not come into relationships across difference, whether it's age, race, class, sex, from a position of superiority. There's nothing better or worse about any of us. We are all equal in this society. Don't make, understand the history and the context. So both that history I just reviewed and the current context of what is going on with LGBT women, what is going on with Black women, with Latinx women. Keep current, so that as you begin a relationship across difference, people don't have to educate you about everything that's going on with them. No one wants to do that. No one has time for that. We need to take the time to do that ourselves. Don't make assumptions. If I had to boil this whole presentation down to one thing, don't make assumptions about people. Ask open-ended questions. Women of color, Black women, are not a monolith. They are just like everybody else, complex, varied individuals. And don't make assumptions that because you are a woman or because you're a Black woman that you're like this or like that. No. Don't interrogate. That's another big mistake that I see people doing, is like, oh, but what about this? And what about that? Like, no one wants to answer 18 bazillion of questions. Pause. Let the relationship develop, okay? Don't ask a barrage of questions. Treat women of color as individuals, not as representatives or spokespeople of their entire group, okay? Just like no one asked me, you know, to speak on behalf of all white women, I'm not gonna ask you to speak on behalf of all Black women. Err on the side of formality. You can always bring your relationship less formal later on, but as you begin a relationship, Be extremely respectful and formal in the way that you interact. Convey that respect with eye contact, choice of words, and tone. And most importantly, listen more, talk less. And I do believe, I know from my own lived experience, true relationships will emerge when allies demonstrate over time we can be trusted and that we are taking consistent, intentional action. We're not just talking about it, we're actually doing it. And let me take a beat there and see if there's anything coming up in the chat.
Yes, thank you so much. I love this list. This is great. We do have a couple comments. First, we have one that says that they recently had a conversation with someone who advised that they had to learn that their mission was not to come in, take over, and try to fix things, but to actually help support.
That is so important.
Yes, absolutely important. Because we realize that a lot of people, and this speaks to another comment in the box, a lot of people aren't opening to really listening, helping, or supporting. When you bring up issues, they think that you're the one with the problem, not the people who are creating the issues for you. And so sometimes as a person of color, it's really difficult to work around those situations where, and you mentioned this earlier, where it seems to be that people are deflecting or not really wanting to know the truth about their actions and how their actions impact other people in the organization.
100%. And oftentimes there's that diagram of women of color enters the organization, and then there's a honeymoon period, but then it turns out she's a tokenized hire. So when she starts to point out the things that need to change, instead of listening to her and saying, oh yeah, let's fix that, fix meaning the dominant culture, fix ourselves, instead of saying, oh, you need to change, then she becomes the problem for pointing that out. And then soon thereafter, she is either fired or quits. And then the organization is like, oh, look, see, we tried to hire a woman of color and it didn't work out. And the culture just keeps perpetuating. We can't continue to do that. We have to listen to the feedback and actually change. That feedback is so valuable. It is a precious gift, okay? And I think, like, you know, and I'll speak from my own experience. When I receive growth area feedback, especially because I consider myself, you know, a good white woman, it hurts, right? I have like intense shame, like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that, right? But it's true. And the courage that it took for someone to point that out to me, that took a lot of courage on their part. And I have to recognize that and say, thank you. I'm so glad you pointed that out. And then I have to work on myself. I don't need to ask her to fix me then, right? I don't say, oh, tell me what to do differently. That's not her burden. She already gave the burden of telling me that what I did was harmful. Now it's on
having
me.
The courage to do that.
Yes. And the last thing I need to do is to say, you are the problem, and let me punish you for having pointed that out. That is the master's tools. That is maintaining the master's house 100%.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. So we have about 4 more minutes if you want to finish up your spoken presentation, and then we'll go right into Q&A.
That sounds great. And I wanted to say something else about that point about, I think, like, for so many white women, we have this urge that we need to be perfect, right? We have to look perfect. We have to weigh a certain amount. We have to get 100% on the exam. We have to score the goal, whatever it is. We strive to this ideal of perfection. So we're like, unless I can be a perfect ally, I'm just not going to do it at all. Listen, you are going to make so many mistakes. You are going to cause harm and it's going to hurt, and you're going to feel terrible about it. But just keep going. No one is perfect. This whole system was designed to separate us, confuse us, and keep us fractured from one another. So as we start to repair those fractures, it's inevitable that there's going to be harm. That doesn't mean you fracture again. That means you stay in and you work on healing that fracture. I would love to invite folks. I have an Interracial Sisterhood coalition where we have these conversations, where we work together over time to hear each other's stories and really develop the practices of relating across difference as equals. So if people are interested in that, please do keep in touch with me and I will be happy to share information about that. As far as winding up my presentation, I think it's so easy at times to say, oh, those bad people over there, they need to change. That needs to stop, blah, blah, blah. It's much harder to look ourselves in the mirror and say, in what way am I like them? In what way is what I'm doing harmful? And I love this quote from Lao Tzu so much. If you want to awaken all of humanity, then awaken all of yourself. If you want to eliminate the suffering in the world, then eliminate all that is dark and negative in yourself. Truly, the greatest gift you have to give is that of your own self-transformation. And as we change ourselves, that is how we will change the world. That is how we will influence those bad people over there to change. And we can't control them anyway. We can only control what we do. And also that this is not just individual, it's collective. And I guess with that, I wind up my spoken presentation, and I'd love to hear if you have any questions or reflections on what I had to share today.
Great, Karen. This has been tremendous, such a rich discussion on the topic of interracial sisterhood. I think it's so important for us as women to stick together and, to have each other's back, because it's not always as simple as going to a supervisor or a male counterpart to have these conversations. They may not understand on the same level in which we do as women, because we do have so many things in common, regardless of our race or ethnicity. But with that, I do want to go back and talk a little bit about the gender gap slide that you posted, where 52% of the US population are females, but only 20% are in C-level positions, and so much fewer women of color in those positions. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But with that, can you talk a little bit about female sponsorship and why that's important for women in higher level positions to lift those in lower level positions?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. Intergenerational mentoring and support networks between women is crucial. I think too much of the conversation has been about lean in and push for your own individual advancement and less about our collective advancement as women. And we talk a lot about the glass ceiling, right? That women can get to a certain level in their career, but they can't get past it. But there's also something called the glass cliff. And that's where in the highest levels of companies, oftentimes there will be some big mess created by a white man, and then they'll hire a woman and put her in the position to fix that mess. And it's often a woman of color who is stuck trying to clean this thing up. And that's considered the glass cliff, because then they can blame the problem on that woman of color and deflect the blame from the man who caused the problem in the first place,
Right.
because they won't adequately resource her to be able to solve that challenge. And I think it's when women are in this glass cliff situation, it's extremely important that the other women support her and not compete against her and join in on the boys club saying, oh, ho, 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 look at her, she was unable to fix that, but really come to her aid. And it's examples like this. There are some examples also throughout history. So I'm reading this great book about Harriet Tubman's lifelong friendship with two white women, decades long friendship. And these two white women were abolitionists, suffered, like, struggling for women's rights. And they met Harriet. They opened their homes as stops on the Underground Railroad. And then they started to become friends. And Harriet, by being friends with these women, she was able to get messages into Lincoln's cabinet, because one of them, her husband was the Secretary of State for Abraham Lincoln. One of them sold her a farm in upstate New York so she could bring her parents down from Canada and they could live safely, which was like totally illegal. It was illegal to sell a piece of land to a fugitive enslaved person, but this white woman did it. And for these white women, being friends with Harriet inspired them to become more bold, to take bigger risks, to fight harder. And I think that is a beautiful example of the power when we come together and unite and collaborate with each other in the workplace. That is how we are going to advance. I think this is extremely important, especially in this time of the Great Resignation and so much
Yes.
change in the workplace, right? How can we come into our new roles and really say, I'm gonna, whatever harmful behaviors I engaged in the past, this is gonna be a fresh start, and I'm gonna do it by unity, because working moms, it doesn't matter what your race is, we are all experiencing a lot of challenges right now, and we need each other's support to make the workplace work for everybody.
Agreed. Wow, that is amazing. And as I was listening to you give that response, I immediately thought about the boom for, and especially higher ed institutions, because I'm in higher education. And so particularly with a lot of institutions now developing offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or offices of inclusive excellence, or whatever verbiage they want to use to describe this office. But they're under-resourced. They're not giving them all of the tools and the resources necessary to conquer this feat. And so, we have to do what's best with the little that we have to make the biggest impact. How do we get around that? And thinking about other women on campus, how can we come together to really push for more resources and move these initiatives forward?
Yes, well, and it is very much a glass cliff situation. Like, we have this monumental problem with diversity and inclusion on our campus. We're going to hire a woman of color, oftentimes a Black woman, to do it, to solve the problem. And then when she starts pointing out, okay, you are the problem and you are the problem, instead of saying, oh yes, let me take accountability and actually change, we point the finger at the Black woman and say, no, it's your responsibility to fix this, not ours. So this is again where unity, okay, the university patriarchy is not working for all women, okay?
No, it's not.
It is not. So having conversations where we can figure out specifically what is not working and collaborate on making it better for all women, I think, is the solution. and white women seeing in the diversity and inclusion office, not only um, not only being an ally to that office, but also realizing that we are part of the beneficiaries of that office. Okay.
Yes.
That we need to support each other mutually toward our mutual success, because keeping us divided is exactly how the patriarchy is going to just keep
Yep.
on rolling. They could care less, right? They just put up that office to look good and to be able to put it on their website and say,
Right.
oh, look, we have an office of diversity and inclusion.
Right.
But
check a few boxes, it's all good.
Meanwhile, we're all running around ragged, trying to put food on the table, help our kids with the homework, deal with our elderly relatives who are struggling in the pandemic,
Absolutely.
deal with all these work responsibilities, and oftentimes with very little support from anybody else. And we're all in that situation together. So how can we unite and collect it? Because there's no individual solution to those challenges. It has to be a collective solution. There is no way to solve them individually.
Absolutely. I think that is so important. And we have a comment saying, and when you have these situations, it's just like being on a merry-go-round. We've been trying this for 20 years, but we have just not managed to be successful at this, and it's like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? What have you been doing the last 20 years to where you still do not have something concrete in place?
And by design. By
design, absolutely. It's laughable.
Which is bringing up another example of interracial sisterhood. There's just a new podcast interview out with Anita Hill and Christine Blasey Ford in conversation. And Christine Blasey Ford talks in the interview about how it was Anita Hill who gave her the courage to come forward with her story. That if Anita Hill hadn't come forward with her story, she would have said, oh, let's just let another powerful man do what he's going to do. Right. But because Anita Hill gave her that courage, that's what gave her the space to be. I can't even talk about it without starting to cry. I know. And talk about another thing where 30 years have passed and not a damn thing is different, right? Not that the women can come forward with these stories. And then we just heard that the FBI got 4,500 tips on things that Brett Kavanaugh had done and did not investigate a single one. So, whew.
It can be very depressing. I'm glad that she was able to get something positive out of it. But every time I hear the name Anita Hill, I remember as a youngster watching the trial and just thinking, this man is going to get off. He's going to get off because of his power and his position. And that's why I always encourage women to speak truth to power. And, there will likely be repercussions for that. But we have to be empowered to use our voice, even if it means that we have to leave that particular organization and find another job. And I know it's easier said than done, but when you think about it, at the end of the day, the female is the one suffering if she does not put a voice on that situation. Yes. And so just, having that group of girlfriends and allies and those sisters around to say, you can do this, or you're better than this. It's just so empowering, and it's refreshing because it lets her know that she does have support and that she's not in this alone. And I tell you, we can talk all day just about that topic, but I know that we have to continue moving forward. We only have a few minutes. I want you to know that in the chat, you have so many kudos and women who are responding about how needy organizations are to have this conversation. because we don't have the conversation. And like you said, it's almost like people feel like it's every individual for themselves. And that's not the case. We have to band together. We have to stick together. And, we see what happens when people start coming together and doing things collectively. It causes movement, it causes agitation. And so that's what we have to do. That's what happened with the civil rights. That's what happened with the Ahmaud Arbery case. And we see that in the news now. And we just have to continue to have this collective action going on. This is what this summit is all about, IDE, and there has to be action behind all of that. And so it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about us. So with that said, a lot of women are wanting to know, how can they join the Interracial Sisterhood Coalition?
You. Well,
Yes.
Listen, my email is Karen@KarenFleshman.com. You can also contact me via racyconversations.com. And I will be happy, like if you go on Racy Conversations, RACY conversations.com, you can sign up for my newsletter and I will be happy to send you the information about joining the Interracial Sisterhood Coalition. Also, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's stay in communication with each other. I can also share that information with you on LinkedIn. And I am so grateful. You have been such an incredible moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I do have one more. The ladies would like to know if there are any books or tools that they can look for in regards to interracial sisterhood.
Thank you. So 2 really great resources. Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis gives us this whole history so well. It's like a very short book, very easily read, but you will learn so much from reading that book about how women got divided and what the impact of our division has been. And the other thing I would highly recommend is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. It's a collection of essays, including that one that I drew that quote from, where she's talking about these exact same issues from the 1980s. And also coming up, Minda Hart's Right Within, yes, just came out, and there's going to be, Dr. Nika White is doing a book club. Yes, with Minda. Minda's my dear friend. We talk about this stuff all the time. It's so important. Minda's books are not just women of color. She has chapters for white women, directed to white women to help us learn what we can do to be better sisters and allies in the workplace. And I just want to reiterate that this is not just about cis-het women. This is inclusive of all gender identities, all sexualities. We got to work together.
Yes, we do. Okay, on behalf of Greenville Chamber's 5th Annual DEI Summit and presenting sponsor Michelin North America, I would like to thank Karen and you for your participation in this event. At this time, you may log out and transition to the next segment of today's summit as per the agenda. This concludes this session, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Karen, you've been great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lanika. You have been great.
Welcome.
It was such a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for your very, very great moderation. It made a huge difference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed the morning half of the Greenville Chambers 2021 DEI Summit, the big idea presented by Michelin North America. During this break, we're going to have a special video presentation by Greenville Racial Equity and Economic Mobility Commission, also known as REAM. But thank you again, before we roll this video, thank you to all of these breakout sessions, these workshops with Amber Cabral, Karen Fleshman, Katrina Rivera, and Rhodes Perry. Great stuff. Please continue the conversation, but take a minute, give your attention to this video.
My name is Megan Barp. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Greenville County, and I'm one of the 3 co-founders of the Racial Equity and Economic Mobility Commission, along with the Greenville Chamber of Commerce and the Urban League of the Upstate. We got involved in REAM, as we fondly call it, in mid-2020, and the reason why we did that is because we knew that there was a national reckoning as it relates to racial inequalities around our country. We're in the midst of COVID-19, of course, as well, where we saw significant racial inequities there as it relates to health disparities. And, I called up Carlos Phillips, mainly to check and see how he was doing, and Sean Dogan as well, to have a conversation about their families and our community and what we could do together collectively to change Greenville and Greenville County for the better as it relates to our racial inequities that we're facing right here at home. And our first idea was, let's write an op-ed and educate the community on these needs and what we're seeing and how we might approach it. And we did a really strong call to action as part of that as well. And after releasing that, we thought, gosh, the call to action is actually to our organizations and our broader community to do something. And out of that, we formed the Racial Equity and Economic Mobility Commission.
I'm Carlos Phillips, President and CEO of the Greenville Chamber, where our vision is of a globally competitive upstate economy where businesses succeed and people prosper. We enter this work because we just feel that the more that we can eradicate race-based disparities in income, health, education, and justice, the closer we'll come to achieving that vision.
My name is Sean Dogan, and I am the former interim CEO and president of the Urban League of the Upstate. This is real. Anytime a young person, especially a person of color, is born in the lower quintile economically in our county, they only have a 4% chance of reaching the top quintile. That is absurd. And we as a community can do something about it. The REAM Commission is committed to making sure that recommendations don't just sit on a shelf, but that they have actionable strategies behind it in order that we can advance for our future.
This is not a study that we look at all the issues, we talk about it a lot, and then we file it away for someone else to do something with. We've been very strategic about wanting to use that data, but also understand how we can move this work forward as it relates to 5 different areas: income and wealth, health and wellness, education, criminal justice, and community-wide learning. And we have work groups on each of those areas that are really charged to bring together the 2 to 3 recommendations that they have on where we can move the needle in Greenville County to improve lives for African American residents. And that's what's so impactful about this, is that it will be real examples of work and efforts that we can move forward to make a difference.
My name is Jessica Donnan, and I am with EY, and I serve on the Income and Wealth Subcommittee, where we're focused on developing foundational work to eliminate the wealth gap that exists between Black and white individuals in our community. The way that we plan to eradicate this wealth gap is ensuring a livable wage, also our collective action to create housing stability, and of course, the long-term commitment and support to the Black-owned business community.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shanice Chris. I work at Furman University, and I'm a Travelers Rest City Council member. I serve as co-chair on the Health and Wellness Committee for the REAM Commission. We are passionate and committed to health equity. Health equity means that everybody has access and opportunity to optimal health. The issue right here in our community is that there are health disparities, and we see that within the Black community. And we see them from birth, when people take their first breath, to death, when people take their last. So we know we have to do something about it. We have looked specifically at birth outcomes dealing with the mother and the child, obesity, which is linked to many chronic conditions, mental health, and access to care. We know that it's going to take partnership for us to move forward with solutions. We want to partner with community members, organizations, private and public entities to make long-lasting solutions. We believe Greenville County can be a place where health flourishes for all.
I'm Katie Smith. I lead the Greenville Partnership for Philanthropy, a network of funders in Greenville County, and I co-chair the Community-Wide Learning Committee of REAM. The Community-Wide Learning Committee is focused on helping the community develop a shared understanding of economic mobility and racism and its history in Greenville County, but more importantly, of helping us develop solutions together, to learn how to talk with one another, to listen to one another, and really come up with a shared longing for what we want Greenville County to be. Some of the things we're planning to do are sessions in which residents of Greenville County can converse with one another and learn how to have good substantive conversations, in which people can learn about the history of Greenville County in engaging and interesting ways, in which people can learn about ways to improve our community and economic mobility for everybody here.
I'm Stacy Mills, and I have the privilege of serving as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Regional Engagement and Executive Director of the USC Upstate Greenville campus, and I serve as Senior Minister at Mountain View Baptist Church in downtown Greenville. I think those two roles serve wonderfully in this capacity for us to be able to participate in the Education Subcommittee, whose focus is on early learning, academic proficiency, graduation, and post-secondary success for all of our students in Greenville County. The pedagogy suggests that theories of learning may not necessarily be the same for all students, but the wraparound services, we can help students get to their finish line together in a more efficient way. And we believe that this is the right time for the right conversation to expand our knowledge and to increase our reach to make sure that people are having an equitable experience in Greenville.
I'm Howie Thompson. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Greenville, and I'm a co-chair for the Criminal Justice Committee of the REAM Commission. The Criminal Justice Subcommittee has focused on 3 individual areas that we think will assist in ensuring that everybody is treated equitably. Intervention and prevention, especially involving youth. We want to prevent youth from even entering the system. Re-entry for our returning citizens. People coming back to the communities from prison need help, and we want to ensure they get that help. And also work with law enforcement agencies, the judicial system, and probation and parole, all law enforcement, parts of law enforcement and the criminal justice system to ensure that everyone in the system is treated equitably.
I'm David Lominack. I'm the South Carolina Market President for TD Bank here in Greenville, and I'm also the co-chair of the Greenville County Racial Equity and Economic Mobility Commission. REAM is important to me because I'm born and raised in Greenville. I love Greenville, and there are so many wonderful things about Greenville, but we also have to take a step back and realize that our history isn't perfect, and nor are we perfect today. There are citizens in our community that are not enjoying the benefits that many of us have been able to enjoy about Greenville. And REAM is an opportunity for us to tackle the health disparities, the criminal justice disparities, the education disparities, and the income disparities in our community. And I'm so proud of what the Commission has been doing in the last 15 months, and I'm proud of the recommendations they're putting forth, which we hope to put forth in front of the community by the end of this year.
My name is Merle Floyd Cody. I am a retired municipal court judge, retired lawyer, retired mediator. And I now am spending my time trying to do whatever I may be able to do to enhance my community to racial relations. This REAM Commission is a way of focusing, if you will, the assets of this community to address the inequities that exist. The inequitable disparities in education and policing and health and wellness all came to the light by statistical data that says we can address those issues as a community, because there are chances and hope for us to change the plight of people in our community, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, our neighbors, so that we can have a harmonious place to live, different from anywhere else maybe, but we have the capacity to be different. If you find something that makes you want to get involved in what we are attempting to do in Greenville County, please visit the website, reamgvl.org. Please visit, sign up, volunteer, get involved, and help us change the place we live.